He wanted a son, but what he unleashed was a revolution. Wives were executed, churches were burned, queens were crowned and crushed. This is not just the story of power. It's the story of how one family changed England forever. Welcome to the Tudors. The Tudors, England's most dangerous dynasty. Chapter 1. He wanted a son. How the Tudors shattered England. It was 1509. A new century had dawned, and with it a new king. Young, tall, and full of promise, Henry VIII was everything a Renaissance monarch should be. Athletic, charismatic, deeply educated. He spoke several languages, played multiple instruments, and rode through the streets of London like a chivalric prince reborn. England had waited generations for a figure like him. But beneath the pageantry, a silent urgency stirred. The Tudor dynasty was still new. His father, Henry VII, had seized the throne at Bosworth, ending decades of civil war. The Wars of the Roses had left England bruised and suspicious. The stability Henry VIII inherited was fragile, and the key to preserving it, so everyone believed, was a male heir. The shadow of childless kings haunted history. No son meant no certainty. No certainty meant unrest, plots, rebellions, invasions. And so, even as Henry rode out in tournaments, even as he presided over elaborate feasts and composed songs of love and power, one pressure never left him. Beget a son. Secure the dynasty. Turn the Tudor name from a claim into a lineage. Catherine of Aragon was no ordinary consort. She was the daughter of Spain's Catholic monarchs, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, two rulers who had driven out the Moors and unified Spain under one faith. She had royal blood, religious fire, and political vision. Her marriage to Henry was both alliance and affection. Despite being first wed to his late brother Arthur, Catherine and Henry shared laughter, purpose, and early hope. The court adored her. Chroniclers called her the true Queen of Hearts. But marriage in Tudor England was not for love. It was for sons. And here, fate turned cruel. She conceived multiple times. A stillborn daughter, a boy who lived only weeks, another miscarriage. Then, finally, Mary. A healthy girl, but a girl was not enough. Year after year, Catherine grew older, and with each year, Henry's hope faded. Court physicians whispered. Was her womb cursed? Clergy muttered. Was God punishing them for marrying against Scripture? In the quiet halls of Greenwich and Whitehall, Catherine prayed. Henry brooded, and England watched. A storm was coming. Anne Boleyn was not the most beautiful woman at court, but she was the most dangerous. Raised in the refined courts of the Netherlands and France, Anne returned to England with confidence, wit, and an eye for power. She refused Henry's gifts. She avoided his touch. She played the game of courtly love not as a pawn, but as a queen in waiting. To Henry, she was intoxicating. To Catherine's allies, she was a threat. And to England, she was a harbinger of chaos. But Anne was more than ambition. She was a catalyst. She brought Henry banned books, Luther, Tyndale, Erasmus. She challenged the idea that the Pope was supreme. She whispered of sovereignty, of spiritual independence. What began as flirtation became revolution. Henry pursued an annulment. Rome refused. The Pope, under pressure from Catherine's nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor, stood firm. But Henry, emboldened by desire and righteousness, would not be denied. What God had joined, he would now tear asunder. No one had dared such a break before. Kings defied the church at their peril. Excommunication meant political isolation, eternal damnation. But Henry saw another way. He summoned Parliament. He reshaped law. He declared the Pope had no authority in England. In 1534, the Act of Supremacy passed. Henry became head of the Church of England. Some cheered, others trembled. Monasteries, centers of learning, charity, and tradition were dissolved. Monks were cast out, sacred relics were seized, statues of saints were torn down, gold chalices melted, the sacred made profane in service of the crown. Resistance came. Sir Thomas More, once Henry's trusted advisor, refused to acknowledge the new order. For this, he lost his head. Bishops who opposed the Reformation were executed or exiled. Even commoners who spoke too freely met the scaffold. The break with Rome was not a quiet rebellion. It was a national fracture. Anne Boleyn, now Queen of England, held the future in her womb. The court held its breath. So did Henry. In September 1533, a child was born. A girl, Elizabeth. Henry's face, according to observers, fell. He masked his disappointment with speeches and proclamations. But the truth was clear. She was not the prince he needed. Still, Elizabeth was royal, clever-eyed, fierce in spirit even as an infant. But the disappointment surrounding her birth would haunt her and her mother for years to come. Anne tried again and failed. Her position weakened, rumors swirled, accusations of witchcraft, adultery, even incest. A trial, a spectacle, a sword from France. Anne Boleyn was executed in 1536. Yet the child she bore would outlive all expectations. Elizabeth Tudor, born unwanted, would one day become the ruler of an empire. But for now, she was just a child, the echo of a father's broken dreams, and the spark of a dynasty that was only beginning to show its fire. He wanted a son, but what he birthed was something far more enduring and far more dangerous. A national church, a cycle of blood and power, and a daughter who would wear the crown with more strength than any son he ever imagined. The story of the Tudors begins not with triumph, but with tension, and it would only grow more perilous from here. Welcome to England's most dangerous dynasty. Chapter 2. Fire and Faith. Radical change and fervent belief transformed England into a divided state. The monasteries had long been the spiritual backbone of England, centers of learning, charity, and worship. For centuries, they preserved the knowledge of the ancients, offered refuge to travelers, and provided sustenance to the poor. They were pillars of the Catholic world. But to Henry, they represented an empire within the realm, wealthy, loyal to Rome, and worst of all, resistant to change. The dissolution began as a legal audit. Commissioners sent out to inspect monasteries noted mismanagement, moral decay, and excessive wealth. These reports were often exaggerated, but they served their purpose. The smaller houses were the first to go. Monks were forced to swear loyalty or leave. Treasures were carted off to the royal treasury. Then came the larger abbeys, Glastonbury, Fountains, Walsingham. Sacred relics were destroyed, ancient libraries burned, entire communities displaced. But this was not just about power or land. Henry needed money. Wars were expensive, ambitions more so. The people watched in horror. Some rebelled, like those in the Pilgrimage of Grace. But rebellion meant death. The monasteries burned, and with them, the world of medieval Catholic England. Anne Boleyn had achieved the impossible. She had risen from lady-in-waiting to Queen of England, but the throne, once won, proved perilous. She failed to produce a male heir. She miscarried a son, and Henry, ever restless, began to look elsewhere. At court, Anne had enemies, many. Her sharp tongue and reformist views made her a threat to traditionalists. The Seymour family, whose daughter Jane now caught the king's eye, moved swiftly. Anne stood trial in the Tower. Her dignity remained unshaken, but the outcome was never in doubt. Charges were fabricated, adultery, with multiple men, even incest with her own brother. On May 19, 1536, she was executed by a French swordsman. Her final words were of grace, not bitterness. She died not as a villain, nor as a saint, but as a queen who dared to change history. Just days after Anne's execution, Henry married Jane Seymour. She was quiet, pious, and politically safe. In 1537, she bore him a son, Edward. The child was baptized with grand ceremony. Finally, the Tudor line had a male heir. Henry was elated, but the joy was short-lived. Jane fell ill shortly after childbirth and died within 2 weeks. Henry was devastated. He wore black for months. He called her his one true wife. Yet politics did not rest. The court moved on. Henry would marry 3 more times, but none would give him the combination of love, loyalty, and legacy he found in Jane. Edward was raised under Protestant tutelage. Henry, meanwhile, became increasingly isolated. The man who once danced and debated now limped, obese and paranoid, through echoing halls. When Henry died in 1547, Edward was just 9 years old. A regency council ruled in his name, pushing Protestant reforms further. Images were stripped from churches, altars replaced, Latin replaced by English. Edward was bright but sickly. In 1553, he died at 16. In his place came his half-sister Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. She was Catholic, and she was determined. Mary believed her mother had been wronged, that England had been led astray. She married Philip II of Spain, the most powerful Catholic ruler in Europe. She moved to restore the old faith. Protestant bishops were arrested. Some fled, others resisted. Then came the burnings. In 5 years, nearly 300 Protestants were executed by fire. Among them, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, who had annulled her mother's marriage. He was forced to recant, then burned anyway. Londoners began to whisper. The fires burned not only flesh, but the Queen's legacy. Bloody Mary, they called her. Her reign was short and tragic. Across England, the people were confused. Faith, once a certainty, had become a weapon. Children were born Catholic and grew up Protestant, then Catholic again. Families split by belief, friends betrayed for a wrong word. Sermons turned to surveillance, books were banned, then required, then banned again. Priests fled in secret. Heretics were hunted in daylight. Faith had become politics, and politics had become war. But within the chaos, a new idea began to form. One not rooted in Rome, nor in Geneva, but in England itself. What if a monarch could steer the soul of a nation? What if religion could be English? As Mary's reign waned, eyes turned to her sister, Elizabeth, a woman raised in the shadows of court intrigue, a daughter of controversy, and yet, perhaps, a child shaped by fire to become something more. England needed peace, and in the ashes of so much faith lost, it waited for a new beginning. This was not a time of peace. It was a time of purging, of redefinition. Old truths burned, new truths emerged, and the people paid the price. Monasteries, queens, martyrs, and heretics lost in the roaring fire of dynastic ambition. But out of the flames, rose something unexpected: a new queen, a new age, and the birth of Protestant England was only just beginning. Chapter 3: The Virgin Queen, the reign of Elizabeth I of England. When Elizabeth Tudor took the throne in 1558, few could have imagined the legacy she would leave behind. The daughter of Anne Boleyn, a woman executed for treason and adultery, Elizabeth was born under scandal and crowned under suspicion. She was young, unmarried, and Protestant. 3 strikes in a world ruled by men and shaped by religion. Yet from the moment she ascended the throne, she moved with uncanny precision. Her coronation procession through London was a performance of reconciliation. She spoke to the crowds, smiled at their cheers. She read their hearts and gave them hope. She chose seasoned statesmen to advise her, but made it clear she alone would rule. She stepped into power with one foot in tradition, one in modernity, and the eyes of Europe fixed upon her. Elizabeth's reign was a chessboard of enemies and assassins. To Catholics, she was illegitimate, a heretic usurper. The Pope excommunicated her. Spain plotted against her. France toyed with invasion. And at the center of many conspiracies was her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary had fled Scotland and taken refuge in England. But her presence was volatile. Catholic factions saw her as the true queen. Letters were smuggled, plans were drafted, names were written in cipher. Sir Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth's spy master, built the most effective intelligence network of the age. He planted double agents, intercepted letters, and staged stings that would rival any modern thriller. One such plot, the Babington Plot, revealed Mary's complicity in a plan to assassinate Elizabeth. Reluctantly, the Queen signed her cousin's death warrant. In 1587, Mary Stuart was executed. The Catholic world mourned. Elizabeth wept, not only for her cousin, but for the heavy price of survival. Mary's death enraged Philip II of Spain. Already angered by English support of Dutch rebels and attacks by privateers like Francis Drake, Philip now launched his final blow: the Spanish Armada. It was to be a holy crusade, a fleet of over 130 ships carrying thousands of soldiers and priests. Their mission: invade England, depose Elizabeth, and restore the true faith. Elizabeth did not hide. She rode to Tilbury to address her troops, clad in armor, speaking not as a woman, but as a warrior queen. Her words echoed, "I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." As the Armada approached, English fireships scattered the Spanish formation. Storms battered the coast. Tactical brilliance finished the rest. The invincible Armada was defeated. England stood triumphant, and Elizabeth became legend. In the wake of war, Elizabeth fostered a golden age of art and discovery. Her court became a hub of cultural brilliance. Playwrights like William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe explored ambition, love, betrayal, and nationhood. Their words shaped English identity for centuries. Poets like Edmund Spenser wrote epics in her honor. Explorers like Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh circled the globe and staked claims in the New World. Elizabeth herself understood image. She turned her presence into ritual, progresses through the countryside, grand banquets, masks of myth and allegory. She never married, yet she was courted by kings and princes. She flirted with diplomacy as she did with men, always in control, never committed. Her court was both stage and strategy, and she was its star. Over time, Elizabeth transformed herself into something more than monarch. She became Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, untouched and eternal. Portraits showed her adorned with pearls, the moon at her feet, the world in her hand. She was not just ruling England, she was England. But behind the icon was a woman. She aged. Her closest advisors died. The world changed. New factions emerged. The court, once filled with light and verse, grew quiet and tense. The question of succession loomed. She had no children, no heir, and still she refused to name one. But her image never cracked. She ruled until the end, fierce, brilliant, unknowable. And when she died in 1603, the people mourned not only a queen, but a symbol, a guardian of peace, a beacon of strength. The Tudor flame flickered one last time, and then was passed to a new house and a new century. Elizabeth's reign was forged in fire. Rebellion, war, betrayal, and doubt surrounded her from the beginning, but she endured. In an age where women were expected to submit, she commanded. In a kingdom torn by faith, she found compromise. In a court full of danger, she danced on the edge and never fell. The Virgin Queen ruled not as a mother, nor a wife, but as a monarch who understood her people and her moment. And in doing so, she carved a legacy that outshone even the king who longed for a son. Chapter 4. Power Games. From political intrigue to familial rivalries. No monarch, no matter how brilliant, reigns alone. And Elizabeth, though singular in vision, knew the strength of governing through council. The Privy Council became her instrument of rule. It was a collection of minds, seasoned, loyal, sharp. They debated policy, enforced law, managed diplomacy, and steered the ship of state through turbulent waters. Sir William Cecil, later Lord Burghley, was her anchor. With unmatched political instinct, he guided England through the minefields of succession, foreign threat, and religious unrest. Later, his son Robert Cecil would carry that torch. Quiet, strategic, often underestimated. At her side, too, was Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. More than a counselor, he was her confidant, perhaps her love. Their closeness raised eyebrows, but no proof ever breached the throne room. Elizabeth kept these men near, but never too close. She demanded loyalty, but tolerated dissent. She listened, weighed, and then decided. The council advised, but the queen ruled, and all who entered her chamber understood. Their heads depended on her trust. Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, was everything Elizabeth had once admired. Bold, handsome, romantic. He was also impulsive, vain, and reckless. She raised him high, gave him command, showered him with favor, and in return, he gave her pride and peril. His failures in Ireland, his arrogance at court, and his jealousy of Robert Cecil created a toxic brew. When the Queen scolded him publicly, he stormed out. That was the beginning of his fall. In 1601, Essex tried to raise a rebellion. His forces were small, his cause unclear. Within hours, it collapsed. He was arrested, tried for treason, and condemned. Elizabeth hesitated. She delayed the warrant. Perhaps she hoped for repentance. Perhaps she waited for a miracle. But none came. Essex was executed. The Queen, now old and increasingly alone, retreated further into silence. Those who witnessed her in the days that followed said her spirit dimmed. The fire that once burned so brightly now flickered. Elizabeth's strength lay not just in her intellect, but in her ability to choose those who would serve her best. Sir Francis Walsingham, the Spy Master General, a man who trusted no one, feared everything, and saw plots before they formed. He built an intelligence empire from scratch. His agents operated across Europe. His fingerprints were on every intercepted letter, every decoded cipher, every quiet execution. Lord Burghley, her rock. He managed finances, arranged marriages, negotiated peace, and suppressed rebellion. He wrote thousands of letters in her name and never once betrayed her trust. Robert Cecil, hunchbacked, sharp, underestimated. He outmaneuvered rivals, managed the Queen's later years, and orchestrated the peaceful transition to the Stuart dynasty. They were not saints. They were men of ambition and calculation, but they served a queen who demanded and inspired greatness. Elizabeth inherited a religious battlefield. Her father had broken with Rome. Her brother had veered toward radical Protestantism. Her sister had violently restored Catholicism. Elizabeth took another path. The Elizabethan religious settlement was not about purity. It was about peace. It made the Church of England the law, but allowed just enough ambiguity to keep the fires from reigniting. The Bible was in English, the Mass simpler. But bishops still wore vestments. Altars remained. Her motto was simple: I do not seek to make windows into men's souls. Those who conformed outwardly were tolerated. Those who defied openly, Puritans, Jesuits, agitators, were crushed. She understood something few leaders do, that in religion, control lies not in dogma, but in the illusion of choice. But peace was fragile, always. The Puritans wanted more reform. The Catholics wanted Rome restored. France and Spain meddled. Scotland brooded. Ireland burned. Elizabeth faced assassination attempts, papal denunciations, foreign spies, and religious extremists. Her court became a theater of secrets. Smiles hid daggers. Friendship masked betrayal. Even within her inner circle, ambition stirred. Some sought to guide succession, others to undermine rivals. But none dared move without gauging the Queen's gaze. She played them all, pitting one against another, maintaining balance through division. By the 1590s, Elizabeth was aging. Her beauty faded, her temper sharpened. Her court, once bright with poetry and progress, grew cold with fear. And yet, none dared rise against her. She had become a monarch of myth, a ruler cloaked in legend. And as the last of the Tudors, she stood alone atop the world she had shaped. Elizabeth's reign was a game of power, played not with armies, but with wit, loyalty, and sheer endurance. She faced traitors and tyrants. She endured gossip, war, and loneliness. She lost friends. She lost love. But she never lost control. Her strength was in her ability to bend without breaking, to lead a fractured kingdom without letting it fall apart. In the end, she reigned not just as a queen, but as a master of the game itself. Chapter 5. A Dangerous Legacy. The Threats Left Behind for Future Generations. On the cold morning of March 24th, 1603, the Tudor age came to a silent, solemn end. Queen Elizabeth I, Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the last of her name, passed away at Richmond Palace after nearly 45 years on the throne. Her final days were marked not by ceremony, but by reflection. She refused food, refused her bed. She stood in silence, wrapped in robes, staring into space, her mind weighed down by years of rule and memory. No royal children wept at her bedside. No heirs knelt for a final blessing. She died as she lived, alone, sovereign, and enigmatic. The bells tolled for hours. Across the country, men and women wept, not only for a queen, but for a world that was vanishing with her. With Elizabeth's passing, the Tudor bloodline ended. There would be no more kings or queens born of Henry VIII, no direct Tudor to carry on the flame. And yet, the story was far from over. Power, like fire, cannot be left untended. Even before Elizabeth's death, plans had been laid. Robert Cecil, her last and most meticulous minister, had maintained a quiet correspondence with James VI of Scotland, son of Mary, Queen of Scots, great-grandson of Henry VII, a man with both Tudor blood and foreign manners. Though Elizabeth never publicly named him, she had allowed the path to be cleared. Within hours of her death, James was proclaimed King of England. He traveled south with caution and ceremony. Along the way, nobles pledged loyalty, cities celebrated. For the first time in history, England and Scotland shared a monarch. The Tudors had ruled from the heart of a single kingdom. The Stuarts would rule over a union, and over the tensions that came with it. But in the minds of many, the question lingered: could James ever fill Elizabeth's shoes? Could a man of books and brooding ever replace a queen of spectacle and steel? The Tudors didn't just rule, they engineered monarchy. Henry VIII revolutionized the very foundation of power. By breaking with Rome, he became head of both state and church, a move that reshaped European politics and carved a new national identity. He used Parliament to legitimize revolution and spectacle to justify terror. Mary used marriage to forge alliances. Her reign, though brief and bloodied, brought Europe's gaze back to England and reminded the people what religious fury could unleash. Elizabeth elevated monarchy to myth. She became an icon, using art, theater, and architecture to define the nation's image. She transformed loyalty into culture, obedience into pride. They didn't just inherit power, they remade it. Brick by brick, law by law, symbol by symbol, the Tudors left England with more than memories. They left a template. Time smooths the edges of memory, and the Tudors, whose reigns were marked by torture, repression, and war, have become beloved figures in our imagination. Henry VIII, the tyrant king who tore down monasteries, who executed wives, friends, and enemies alike, now appears in textbooks with a feathered hat and jovial smirk, a larger-than-life figure whose brutality is overshadowed by his pageantry. Elizabeth I, the queen who refused marriage, who oversaw the execution of her cousin, who ruled with fire and control, now appears as a symbol of wisdom, wit, and national pride. They are immortalized not for what they endured, but for what they embodied. And yet, beneath the polished portraits lies the truth. Theirs was a rule of constant tension, of fear and splendor, cruelty and charm. Their transformation into icons is as much part of their legacy as the policies they imposed. But the greatest legacy of the Tudors lies not in crown or castle, but in continuity. Before them, England was fractured, politically, religiously, and emotionally. It had endured civil war, papal intervention, and dynastic fragility. After them, England stood stronger, more centralized, more governed, more English. The Church of England became not just a religious body, but a cultural pillar. Parliament, once a tool of monarchs, began to expect a voice of its own. The idea of England, one nation, one crown, one destiny, took hold. That legacy would be tested under the Stuarts, broken under Cromwell, reassembled again and again. But the mold was Tudor, and it remains so today. We have journeyed through a world of ambition and faith. We have stood in the shadows of kings and queens who dreamed of immortality, and sometimes found it. We have seen how power is not just seized, but shaped, how belief can build a kingdom or burn it, and how legacy is never a guarantee, but always a pursuit. The Tudors remind us that greatness comes with a cost, that every crown is heavy, and that even the most dangerous dynasties leave behind more than ruins. They leave questions. So now I ask you, what is the true cost of power? And how do we remember those who claimed it? To the scholars and researchers who spend their lives digging through the layers of this story, to the teachers who pass on the wonder and warning of history, and to you, traveler of time, thank you for walking with me, for thinking deeply, for listening closely. If this tale sparked something in you, share it, discuss it, challenge it. And if you want to support more timeless journeys, subscribe, become a member. Take a look in our Timeless Tales shop and join us in shaping the next story. I am Phileas Kronos. And until our next tale, stay curious, stay critical, and above all, stay timeless.